We're going to talk about mixing acrylic paint. I'm not going to talk about mixing acrylic colors. I've already spoken to how to mix colors in previous presentation. The mixing of colors, watercolors and acrylics and most any other paint is pretty much the same. You use one of the primaries, you mix it till you get the color you want. Now the difference between what I said about mixing watercolors and acrylics is the properties. We're not going to be concerned with granulation in acrylics, whether it's staining, whether it's easy lift or hard lift. That's not going to be our concern. The properties that we need to be concerned with when we mix acrylics is whether opaque, translucent, or transparent. Now if you mix an opaque color, cadmium red's a good one, which is opaque, with one of the transparent reds, is going to make a difference. And usually when you underpaint, it's a good idea to underpaint with an opaque and then cover it with a transparent, and we'll speak to that later. Primarily what we're concerned with acrylics when we paint with them is the dry time and how long they're going to stay wet, and the color that we mix, whether we can mix it again or not, and that can be difficult, and I'll show you how to deal with that now. But the first thing, when you break out your acrylic paints, you're going to have to put it on a palette of some kind. Let me show you. Let's start with the negatives first. What not to use. Do not use a wooden palette. The acrylics are going to stick to it, and you're going to have a hard time getting it off. This was originally designed for oil paints. Another one that I use is a glass palette. Don't put it on there either. I mean, you can get it off once you put it on there, but you're going to have a hard time getting it off. You're probably going to have to use a solvent. So when I first started, a long time ago, shortly after acrylics were made, I used a dinner plate. And I've already put some here on the dinner plate. You can get any good quality dinner plate. It's going to work fine. And let me show you what I mean by that. I got to get this off when I finish painting. Now, I usually use something other than metal, and unless it's really hard, because I don't want to damage the surface of my palette. I can use a metal painting knife, or I can use a plastic one. But let's try the plastic one first, and I'll show you how it goes. And you can see it comes off, and it doesn't damage the surface of the plate. As you can see, if I use this metal one, it's going to be a lot easier. It's just got to be a lot more careful about how you take it off. That works well. You try that on that wooden palette, you're going to tear the palette up. So this is all you got. That'll work great. And you'll see some of that in demonstrations. Now they do make specialized palettes that you can buy. They're not too expensive. For painting with acrylics, they have like a plastic surface on it. And as you can see, this comes off also. This is a big drawback. And it comes off a lot easier than it did on that plate. That's the plastic one. Here's the metal one. I use the metal ones very carefully. And once I clean my palette up the next day after I finish painting, I can reapply my palette paints, or my acrylic paints, onto my palette. You know, one of the very best palette for acrylic paints is this. It's called a paper palette. It comes in different forms and shapes. This is a nice one because it's shaped so like traditional palette. And it's got a surface on it that you can put your acrylic paints on, and while you're painting, it'll come on. The nice thing about it is when you're finished and you fill up the palette, you just tear it off and there's another one underneath there. And you get a lot. To me, this is good. I like this. I use these a lot. So I mix up my paint, I put it on there. Next day I come back and say, okay, I want to make the same color. Well, it's probably not going to happen. Yeah, it's going to be a little bit lighter, a little bit darker, different tone, different shade. You can deal with that with acrylics. You can deal with it with any paint. And what you do is you mix up a large quantity using one of your painting knives, and you put it in a container, and it stays. Now, I've done this, and I put it in, when I first started, I put it in this type of container. This is a medicine bottle. It's nice. I've had paint last for years, literally years, pre-mixed paint that I've mixed up, the color I mixed, I put it in there, and it stayed. The problem is, of course, it's got a color on it. So I used to put the color here on the top of the lid, and that told me what was in it. Over the years, I've learned that there are better methods and things I like better. For a long period of time, I used baby food jars. Mix up a lot of it, put it in there, keep it. It works well. This is for things like, if you get a flesh tone, you mix a flesh tone up, and you get the medium flesh tone that you're going to lighten or darken at a later date. You need a pretty good quantity of paint, and you need to be consistent with it. And the other, if you're going to do a big painting, you need a lot of paint. It's got to be the same color, and you make sure that it's, you know, consistent. You mix it well outside the container and then put it in here. Here's one, if you're going to do like a huge painting that you can fill with the color you want, put it in there, put a little bit of water with it, make it a little bit thinner than normal, not a whole lot, just to make sure you got enough moisture to account for the evaporation. You're going to have more than enough paint here to do a pretty good sized painting, and you just keep going up and up. If you're going to do a big huge mural, get you a big jar, get something that's watertight. Now they do make specialized containers, which I found are fair. If you're not going to save your paint any longer for a month or two, and they come like this, you can buy them in art shops. They're little plastic containers with little plastic lids. These work well if you're only going to take a short while in your painting. The paint I mixed up in here will last a week or two, and it doesn't start to dry out and doesn't get too thick. I guess that's about it, what I have to say about mixing on your palette. It took a while. It's simple. Mix it off onto a palette and then put it into these containers, a large quantities, and you'll be okay. Now you hear people say, well, you don't want to mix with your brush. Well, we'll go over this later, but if you're doing a painting on your paper or on your canvas or on your hardboard or whatever you're using, and you want to mix two colors, you got to mix with your brush. There's nothing wrong with that. So that's all I have on how to mix acrylics. We'll go over certain formulas, certain combinations of paint. One of the hardest being flesh tones in the future, about how to mix different flesh tones and acrylics so you can do portraits. And we'll talk about how to lose edges and how to graduate those edges so you don't have hard edges. Happy painting.